Hi everyone! My name's Katie Montgomery, and I'm not like the other trans. I'm one of the good ones. Please like me. I think I'm naturally predisposed to be an elitist dickhead. As you may have worked out, I'm a metalhead. I first got into metal when I was about 16 years old, and I think at that age a lot of people are trying to find themselves in the world. I used to have very judgmental opinions about music, and I used to get a lot of my self-worth from judging other people based on their music tastes and placing myself as superior. If you didn't like metal, you're an idiot. And if you did like metal but you liked the wrong metal, then you were even worse. At least someone who only liked pop music was too silly to even know what was going on. Like, if someone liked Linkin Park or Avenged Sevenfold, then ugh. Importantly though, I used to feel like I had all these rational reasons as to why me liking metal was just objectively better. Metal's more technical, it requires more talent to write and play, it can cover more emotions, it's more extreme, it's an acquired taste. I'm sure you've all met a smug elitist dickhead at parties before. Well, that was me. It took me quite a long time to apply skepticism to music and to realise that no art is objectively good or bad. No art is objectively better than any other art. It's all subjective. And if you don't like a piece of art, it's because you don't get it, not because it's innately bad. That was actually a hugely beneficial realisation to me, because it meant that I could suddenly let myself like all of this music, which I had been stopping myself from even attempting to explore. And I now like loads of stuff that I didn't used to like, though still not Linkin Park. You're not better than someone else just because you have a different music taste to them. But I wasn't just an elitist about music, I was elitist about pretty much everything, including grades at school, which is probably even worse than being an elitist about music. It's probably took me until university to realise that getting high grades on tests kind of just means that you're good at tests. And even if you do well at tests, or even do well at something, it doesn't necessarily make you better or worse than someone. So I realised that this elitism that I had for music also applied to other things, like grades, and I suddenly realised it was just a general thought pattern that I slipped into. And on realising that, I've been on the lookout for it in myself ever since. This also means I can recognise elitism in other people from 100 miles away. Takes one to know one, I guess. And I'm glad that I can sense it, because there is nothing better than spotting someone who's an elitist, finding out what they think they're elite about, and just tearing them down. They absolutely crumble, and it's quite satisfying. Oh god, maybe I'm an elitist about being an elitist now? Elitism is about making yourself feel better than the people around you to hide from an insecurity you have about your value as a person. If you can come up with an objective reason as to why you're better than everyone, then you don't need to address why you felt like you needed to come up with that reason in the first place. Sometimes this need for elitism can come from a general insecurity, but often it's because society has valued something that you are, or something you like, or something you do as bad, and it's you reacting to that pressure. So, how does all of this relate to trans people? Ooh. Well, a situation that every single trans person ever has encountered is people saying something horrible about trans people right in front of them, or them seeing trans people being discussed as if they're less than human on television, on the radio, in the media. And it's horrible. There's so much out there telling trans people that they're worthless, or their value is less as a person to society. There are so much bullshit stereotypes. So when you're faced with that kind of situation, you have three options. One, you can believe what you're hearing and take it all in quietly to yourself and just agree with them that you are bad because of this thing that society says is bad. This is a very common reaction and something that I did for a very long time. If you would like to hear more about this, you should check out my last video. 2, you can realise it's wrong and tell yourself and maybe tell others that no, this is wrong. That isn't true about trans people. However, that takes a lot of courage to stand up to transphobia in front of you, even just to yourself. Because you're not just disagreeing with someone, you're not just disagreeing with what's said, you're often disagreeing with something that people have believed for their entire lives, something that they've taken to be just like a fundamental truth of the universe. And so you're really rocking the boat. And when you rock the boat in anything to do with society, then that often opens you up to a lot more reaction and sometimes abuse. Or 3, you can just agree with everything they say, but distance yourself from the group they're talking about. You can be like, haha, yeah, aren't trans people disgusting? But like, just those trans people, like, you know, I'm not one of them, I'm different. I'm one of the good ones. This allows you to side up with the bullies to escape the bullying. It means that you don't have to rock the boat, you can just agree with everything that's going on, but you can hopefully escape it yourself. To be clear, I think most people want to distance themselves from at least some people in some group that they're part of. It's not bad to distance yourself from like criminals. One of the most classic prejudiced oppressor things to do is to judge a whole group by its criminals. And that's obviously bullshit, but that's not quite what I'm talking about. There are some trans people who go out of their way to distance themselves from the trans community to escape the relentless transphobia that they're facing. But they then do it in a way where they just side up with the transphobes and contribute to the transphobia that all trans people are facing. I understand the motivation to do this. I really do. It often is just an attempt to say, you're saying something and I'm not like this like negative stereotype that you're presenting. But if you do it in a way where you say, oh, but I'm not like the stereotype, but this stereotype is true, then really you're just contributing to that stereotype. These people who you're talking to will now go away feeling extra reinforced in that stereotype, and the next trans person they meet, they will assume it's true for them. And that means other people who have had this reinforced for them will come and assume it's true for you. So in the end, you just end up contributing to the overall transphobia. It's like a short-term local fix with long-term negative consequences for you and everyone around you. I think most trans people go through a little phase of this, and probably all LGBT people do to an extent. But there are some people who it becomes their entire identity and like their entire life and importantly their entire sense of self-worth. You're probably already aware of this phenomenon because it actually happens with like every oppressed minority group. The most classic example is, I'm not like the other girls, which is where women will agree about misogynistic stereotypes of women but say, oh, I'm not like them. And they'll even put other women down in order to look good compared to the negative stereotype of women. A classic example would be like, oh, I'm not interested in hair and makeup like most women, which is implying that most women are like just into hair and makeup, or that liking hair and makeup is a bad thing, which it isn't. So the trans version of this, there's a huge list of different things that people like to pick to feel superior to other people. The classics are, didn't come out early enough, don't experience enough dysphoria, didn't pay for the treatment yourself, didn't jump through enough hoops to get the treatment, aren't a binary trans person, aren't masculine enough, aren't feminine enough, don't pass. Lots of them are just appealing to cis-het society. But the important thing to remember here is when someone is trying to do this, they're picking things that are arbitrary. If they've decided they want to distance themselves from you for whatever reason, because they don't like you, then they'll just pick a new thing. If you meet all of their rules, if they're like, oh, you must be this and you must be this, and you meet all of them, and they didn't realise, then they'll just come up with a new rule. And that's how they'll make themselves feel better than you. One time I met someone who decided that they were one of the good ones and I was one of the bad ones, and they were like, I bet you didn't even know you were trans until you were 25. And I was like, mate, I wanted to be a girl when I was 6, and they're like, Exactly. 6? That's a bit late. I knew when I was 3. Absolute cringe city. They clearly just made that up. Just nonsense. One of my favourite examples of this was when I was arguing with some people on Twitter, and one of the most common examples of this came up. Someone said, "You're not a real trans woman unless you've had genital surgery." And so we said to this woman, well, the argument moved on, and we said to this woman, "So who are your heroes?" And she was like, "Blair White and Gigi Gorgeous." And we were like, "You realise neither of those two have had surgery, at least at the time of the argument, I'm not sure now." And she crumbled in front of us because she had built this idea that she was in this small elite group of trans people who were better than all the rest. And the people that she had put in this group with her to look up to was suddenly not part of that group, and she just did not know how to react. And it was kind of sad, but it was kind of funny at the same time. Society is pretty shit to trans people. In the past, it's been worse, but I don't think any other time in history have trans people been under so much public scrutiny about their lives and their everyday actions. It's the first time in history that trans people are visible to the public and the public is aware of them. And that means, as with every single minority group that this happens to, that there's a huge backlash to it, which you've probably noticed. A lot of the noise about trans people is just about them asking for the same rights that cis people already have. And in doing so, they're ruffling a lot of feathers from all of the people who don't want that for whatever reason. Lots of people don't like it when minorities ask for rights, but they also like to think of themselves as fair and not prejudiced. So that means they'll do this thing where they'll say, "I don't hate this minority, I just hate the ones who are making a fuss, causing a scene, trying to change society." And that'll end up with them saying, "I don't hate trans people, I just hate trans rights activists." All these activists making unreasonable demands for equality. But in the case of trans people, we've got to the situation where "I want to go to the toilet like always" has become a political issue, and you're rocking the boat to want to carry on doing what you've always done. So this makes a gap in the market for a certain type of trans person, someone who wants to escape all of this horrific transphobia and is prepared to sell everyone else out to do it by siding up with the oppressors to escape the oppression. And it's actually a kind of symbiotic relationship, because the trans person gets validation by saying these horrible things about other people. One of the best types of validation is actually from the people who hate you, which might sound counterintuitive, but when you were little and you did a drawing at school and you took it home and your mum said, "Oh, that's lovely, dear," that's nice, but your mum does say that about every drawing. Whereas if you took it into school the next day and the school bully, who normally hates you, was so impressed that they had to say, "Well, to be fair, that's a decent drawing," that says a lot. And so there are members of minority groups who do seek out this validation from the people who hate them for who they are. And then on the other side, there's nothing juicier for a bigot than a member of the minority group whose rights they're opposing, who is prepared to stand up and say, "I agree with this person," because then they can say, "See, I'm not a bigot because I support this person. I support this trans person who is willing to speak up against trans rights. That means that I don't hate all trans people, I do just hate the crazy activists." And unfortunately, because of the amount of transphobia in the world at the moment, there are trans people who have made their entire careers off of being one of the good ones. Although the short-term validation can make you feel good, and it can even give some people a career, the reality is that all of these transphobic people do not give a shit. They will say that you're better than the other ones, but as we've already discussed, this one of the good ones, the line in the sand, is arbitrary. They'll just move it around. As soon as you're no longer useful to them, they will drop you. They don't think you're any different to any other trans person. They're opposing all trans rights. When they ban trans women from women's toilets, They're not going to let you still go to the toilet in public just because one time you said that you hate trans people too. Random violent transphobes who are empowered by rising societal transphobia aren't going to suddenly leave you alone because you wrote an article for The Spectator. These people are 100% using these trans people, and I've seen it time and time again. Every single ex-gender critical / ex-TERF trans person that I've ever met has talked about how they got loads of validation and support for speaking out against the trans activists while they were in favour, and as soon as they put a foot wrong, suddenly they were no longer one of the good ones, and all the rules changed, and they were just like all of the other horrible trans activists, even if they only had one differing opinion. And the reason for this is because what makes you one of the good ones is just an arbitrary shifting web of lines in the sand, and the whole point of them is to construct a very small set of trans people who you in theory support for the purposes of making a political point. And in reality, they don't support any trans people. They just want to make it look like they technically do so that they're not so clearly bigoted. It's not an actual standard you can meet. If you do meet it, then they'll just make a new rule up so you don't meet it anymore. So many times I've encountered these people who say, well, I support the good trans people. And I'll say, well, what is a good trans person to you? And they'll list off a few rules that they think is quite difficult to meet, and I'll meet all of them. And I'll be like, well, I meet all of those things. And then they'll just come up with a new one. Or they'll just say, oh, you're one of the bad ones anyway. And it's just nonsense. It's something they tell themselves as much as they tell anyone else, because they want to believe themselves that they're good people and that they're just opposing the crazy activists. So they need these rules to make themselves feel good. I think one point worth raising here is the difference between transgender and transsexual. For most people, transgender is just like the new word for transsexual. Transsexual sounds a bit dated to them, and they say transgender now, and the two words mean exactly the same thing. However, part of this one of the good ones political campaign against trans people's rights has created this distinction between the two. And the idea is that transsexual people are the people who fully transition and meet all of these arbitrary standards, which change depending on what day it is and who they're talking to, and transgender people are everyone else. Now, this is a false dichotomy because transition is not just one single thing that you do or you don't do. It's not one single thing that you do fully or you do partially. It's a big combination of different treatments, of which some people do some people do others, some people do lots, some people don't do as many. Quite often, from these transphobic bigots, part of their restriction on what makes a real transsexual, one of the good ones, trans person is passing. But even the concept of passing alone is not a binary. It's a sliding scale, but it's also multi-dimensional. You can pass to some people and not to others. You can pass at certain times of day and not to other times of day. You can pass depending on what you're wearing. The idea that there's this kind of strict divide between transsexual and transgender is just nonsense. And this is something that I experience all the time. I actually have an official diagnosis of transsexual from when the NHS used that terminology. And I meet all of the classic stereotype points that you need in order to hit that. But I still get gender critical people and TERFs telling me that I'm not really a transsexual because I like heavy metal. I've actually had people say that, or because I didn't come out until I was 25, or blah 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 blah. Just nonsense, completely arbitrary rubbish to exclude me from this small elite group that they theoretically support, but in reality don't. So I think I have a few different messages from this video, depending on who you are. If you're a cis person, just be aware of the idea of a trans person who feels the need to justify and excuse transphobia in order to get validation in return. If you're going out of your way to hunt down trans people who agree with you, and my goodness, does this happen. There are some people who seriously go out their way to find trans people who agree with them. Then you're probably just using them as a tool to justify your transphobia, and maybe you should ask yourself why you're doing that. But also, you know, if you're not a dedicated transphobe, then just be aware that sometimes you might think, oh, is what I just did there transphobic? And you might ask your friend, and just be aware that they might be a bit overly keen to excuse you and like say it's fine because they're worried about being labelled one of the bad ones. So just be aware of that. If you're a trans person who isn't like this and who doesn't understand people who are, then I think the most important thing to remember is that people can change and become better. And also importantly, don't go away thinking that all of the like old school transsexuals think one thing and younger people think another. This divide that some transphobic people are really trying to push just does not exist in real life. And if you're a trans person who thinks you might be doing this or knows you do this, then I guess I want you to know that I really do get it. Like, I understand, I feel the pull. I could get a lot more validation and escape a lot of transphobia if I just threw some other trans people under the bus. My life would be easier. I get like these dedicated transphobes tell me all the time that, you know, they support people like me and it's why am I supporting all of these bad trans people, and they're trying to win me over to their side. I genuinely could forgive you for doing it, and I know you can do better, and even if you've kind of made this your thing, you don't have to do this forever, and you know, I and a lot of people will forgive you for it. It's difficult, there's so much transphobia, and I understand why people want to escape them, and it, you know, sometimes it's just, you just want a quick fix for it, you just want it to go away. But also, I just want you to know that it is utterly, overwhelmingly pathetic to watch you do it. Watching you reply to some transphobic shithead who said, oh, I'm transphobic, I hate trans people, and you reply with, yeah, aren't trans people so disgusting? Like, oh my god, it's so snivelling, it's so pathetic. I am embarrassed on your behalf. I am ashamed for your entire family tree. Like, my god, just, ugh. You do not have to be an absolutely pathetic loser begging for scraps of validation from people who hate you, who want to take away your rights, and who want to make your lives worse. You don't have to contribute to this. It's pathetic. Get a life, my fucking god. So in conclusion, I'm better than you because I'm not an elitist. Ooh. Thank you for watching, everyone. This is my second ever edited video, so I would love your feedback. I hope it was as good as the last one. There aren't actually many trans people like this. As a percentage, it's quite low, but because as soon as you're willing to throw other trans people out the bus, you almost become a celebrity in transphobe world, you've often heard of lots of the people who do this. I guess, like, don't go bullying them. That's not the point of this video. The point is to understand them and to just send a message to them saying, like, get better. So I hope this video has helped you understand this phenomenon and helped you understand the people who do it and why they do it. And perhaps you'll also spot it in other minority groups because it's quite a common human reaction. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe to my channel. I'm actually really excited because it's growing quite well and it's really fun. So I'd love to do more videos like this, and hopefully I'll see you in another video in the future. Thanks for watching, everyone. Bye!